It's actually kind of amazing how we see drivers like Alonso still competing at the front and doing well at the age of 42. It is a massive testament to his fitness and just his general drive to go on. We've also got Hamilton, who's going to be turning 39 next year, and recently we also saw Kimi Raikkonen, who was still up there in his 40s-ish. Michael Schumacher quit the sport when he was 43 years old. Given his fitness, he could have hung on a little bit longer if he wanted, and he could have just slid straight into that Mercedes domination era. So who knows what could have happened? I mean, looking at the record books and you see the oldest drivers to start a race, it is very top heavy with drivers from the 1950s and 60s. You know, physical fitness and conditioning wasn't really a part of the sport yet. I think the general thinking was if you could play a game of golf or tennis without blowing up, you'll be absolutely fine. I mean, back then, the most deciding factor for a driver was their engineering knowledge, bravery, and also finally just straight up driving ability. It would have taken you until your late 30s or 40s to really pin down that understanding. But back to the present, looking at Alonso in his 40s and a few others which are coming up into their late 30s, how is this possible? How are they not creaking and aching? And how are they wanting to go on and drive? And how do they not just fancy sitting down and having a pint? Well, we are about to find out. Nowadays, drivers' performance and conditioning is treated just as intensely as the cars. Things like conditioning and nutrition, F1 drivers are at the peak of their fitness and they can now go on for longer, they have longer careers, and they could easily stand toe-to-toe with some of the fittest athletes in the world, whether that's Premier League footballers or Olympic athletes. But something that the older drivers have that the younger ones cannot buy is wisdom and experience in F1. And this is something that Alonso and Hamilton, and up until recently Kimi, had in absolute spades. That in-depth knowledge and experience that's gained over 10, 15 or even 20 years can massively compensate for any diminishing physical abilities. We've seen how Alonso can put up an absolutely amazing defense when he's got a car behind him that's using DRS and is faster, with Alonso just having that experienced head on him and him understanding the simple physics that is just taking place on him and how that's affecting the car. Experience also gives you an advanced level of driver intelligence which the younger ones don't have yet. Just look at a couple of years ago when Norris made that massive mistake with the tyre situation when he was in the lead of the race. I'm not sure if they were in the same shoes that Alonso or Hamilton would have made that same mistake. And also off the track, the skills to play the game in terms of the media and how to handle other drivers and just feeding information back to your team. Also, older drivers will develop this kind of mental toughness that's just developed through just years of graft and having to deal with all the BS that comes with being an F1 driver. I can't begin to imagine the level of mental fortitude you'd need to excel in F1. I really can't. You know, over the years we've seen many promising young drivers' careers end prematurely just because they've unfortunately buckled under the pressure. They're demoted or sacked from their team and then they're never seen or heard from ever again. This normally improves as a driver gets older because they learn lessons from saying and doing stupid things, some catastrophically stupid things in the past. Alonso and Hamilton, both of them have said and done ridiculous things in the past, but they've used that to grow and develop and become the experienced heads that they are now. Now, we can't talk about drivers having longer careers and racing to an older age without getting into driver safety and just the overall safety of F1. You know, the advancements in technology have made the cars a lot more easier to handle than some of those beasts that we've seen in the past, particularly when you look back to the turbo eras of F1, but also allowing drivers to cope more with what's demanded from them physically. I mean, when you look at some races, kind of ever since F1 started up until the 90s or even the early 2000s, some drivers look absolutely knackered when they finish the race. Now, was this a case of the car being an absolute beast and a nightmare to drive, or was it possibly a case of the driver not being physically as fit at the time? It's probably a combination of both. Before we have the safety that we have now and things like halo devices, some drivers had absolutely massive accidents which they had long-lasting effects that they suffered from. This ended their careers early, they perhaps picked up some knocks that they had to deal with in their careers, then they had to call it quits before they were ready. But when you have drivers who are up there in terms of age, the importance of having a team around you that still want you, even if you're slightly older, because they value your skills. Having these people support you and accommodate you, and who are able to tailor the car to your needs. I'd say as drivers are kind of getting into their late 30s now, I think they're a lot more adaptable than some of the older drivers that we've seen in the past. Historically, drivers have looked at changes in the regulations and rules and the car setups, and they've just gone, no, screw this, I'm off. I mean, take Alonso as an example again. Look at the Minardi he had when he first came into F1, and look at the Aston he has now. In engineering terms, one is pretty much clockwork and the other one is at the top end of what's possible. And something that's a little bit more difficult to get a grasp of is their motivation behind why they're still doing this. I have a feeling that Hamilton and Alonso are both still doing this because they're still kind of competing with each other and who's going to retire first. I think it's a thing of who's going to blink first and who will retire. You have guys like Kimi Raikkonen who tongue-in-cheek admitted that it's just a hobby for him at this stage. He kept doing it just because he loved it. There was nothing expected of him. He didn't have to go out there and try and win championships or races. He was happy just to pick up the points and the team were happy to have him. And then you get drivers who have just such a deep love and passion for the sport. I mean, one of my favourite stories is Graham Hill, where at 41 he found himself that he wasn't able to get a drive. A new generation was coming into the sport and he was seen as an older driver, so in order to stay in the sport and do what he loved, he founded his own team, Embassy Hill Racing. And then you have guys like Mansell, who he didn't win his first championship until he was 39, and he just kept going just for his love for the sport and his will to be competitive. You know, he won his last race at the age of 41 in that beautiful Rothmans Williams. But just like Graham Hill, he had to pack it in because the mind was willing, but the body was just physically not able to do it anymore, as he had that situation with McLaren in 95. By the way, Mansell never actually officially retired, so still awaiting for that comeback, Nige. And you can't talk about older drivers without mentioning Fangio as well. I mean, he retired in 1958 at the age of 47, and 47 in 1958 was old. Probably had another good 20 years left if you were lucky. But there was definitely a period up to the mid-90s where technology just surpassed the driver so much and left that behind. But now with advances in fitness and conditioning and nutrition, we're now seeing the driver start to catch up to the car, if that makes any sense at all. And I think that is what's allowing this longevity now that we're seeing. And I think this is only the start of it. I think we're now going to start to see drivers who are easily able to go up to their late 30s and into their 40s. Because don't forget as well, these big names, they're marketable. Money, money, money. But finally, what does having older drivers mean to me and you, the fans? Well, I'm in my mid-30s, and having drivers around from the V10 and V8 era for me is still fantastic because they're hanging in there and they're still doing well. But I think now age is definitely not a barrier in F1 anymore. If you're still fit and your mind is still sharp and on point, why not? Why can't they still do it? But what do you guys think? Do you think drivers are going to be able to continue their careers for longer into their late 30s and early 40s? Or tell us in the comments about an older driver that you followed. So there we go. Many thanks as always. Please be sure to like, share and subscribe. I'm Paul, and thanks again.